Hey guys, Candace here. I am coming live from the DC area, so I am actually in Virginia for the next few days. I have my first wedding of the season on Saturday, so I just flew in this afternoon and I will be here in this loveliness of the nation's capital. And actually, this live was scheduled for 6 o'clock, but funny enough, I went live in another group that I have that's not even like a photography group. So if anybody was watching in there, you just learned all kinds of stuff about photographing in full sun and you probably don't even care. So anyway, instead of sharing the video, I'm going live again. I'm going to talk about everything that I just talked about in this group that has nothing to do with photography. So you guys can have some tips and tricks for photographing in full sun. So I am popping into the photography group now to see if this live video is popping up. I'm going to share it into my mentoring group. And like I always like to mention, when I do these lives, if you're not part of the mentoring group, then feel free to pop in. I will post a link. And you can join there where you can ask all the questions that you have for anything photography related, business related, wedding related. We do have some people in that group that are not photographers that are in the wedding industry. So feel free to pop in there if you desire, so we can help you with anything business related or photography related. We're happy to answer questions. So I'm actually going to pop in that group right now to make sure that nobody has any questions before we get started. But again, this is all about photographing in full sun. So I'm going to show you guys some examples. I'm actually going to screen share with you here in just a second. So if you have any questions as I'm going through this, then feel free to post that in the question or the comment area, and I will answer any questions you have. Y'all, see, you guys are popping on here. I swear, I just did this Facebook Live not 15 minutes ago for a group of people that don't care about photography. So I went into the wrong group and did my live, so I'm totally redoing it for anybody that just popped on. So, oh my gosh, it's one of those days. So anyway, all right, guys, so I'm going to hop right in and start giving you some tips and tricks for photographing in full sun. So, you know, I'm a wedding photographer. I've been a wedding photographer for a really long time. I'm also a portrait photographer. Typically, when you're photographing portraits, you have the option of scheduling your shoot for a time that's going to give you really beautiful, nice, even, gorgeous, soft light. Usually that's either at sunrise or at sunset. But sometimes the opportunity is just not available. So I actually have a shoot that I do every couple of months for some ladies in the local Virginia, DC area, and our shoots happen in the middle of the day. So we just have to kind of make it work. And through doing those shoots, I've become more and more comfortable with shooting in the full sun and have found that some of those images are some of my favorite images like ever. And then also photographing weddings, you know that you're not always going to be able to find shade. You're sometimes going to have to photograph like straight up in the sun, full on sun, or try to find some type of reflectors around you that are going to give you nice, pretty, even light. So open shade's not always an option. And quite honestly, you can get beautiful images regardless. Doesn't matter. So I'm going to show you today some examples of places where I have shot and how I've approached the situation because there was no shade available. So I'm actually going to screen share here with you guys so you can take a peek. And like I said, feel free to post any questions in the comments area. And I'm just going to keep an eye on the mentoring group too. So if you guys have questions in the mentoring group, I see you guys are watching too, then feel free to post your comments there because I am watching. All right, so screen sharing, I'm going to show you some examples of the shoot that I did back in October. And let me just tell you guys, like, it was hot that day. It was so hot. And it was like straight up full on sun in everybody's faces, but we made it work. So this first image I'm going to show you, I'm going to tell you how this was set up. I'm pretty sure that this was like at noon Like the sun was high up in the sky, y'all. And if you look, this is Gina. This is my friend Gina. I do a shoot for her like every couple of months for some clothing that she sells. And literally, like, we will like change. Well, I don't, but Gina and some other ladies that we get together with change outfits like 30 to 50 times, and we will shoot these images like in all types of environments. So, and a lot of times it happens literally in the middle of the day. So this is probably around 12 o'clock. You can see from the sun here on her that you can see like where the sun is literally like beating down. So what I made sure to do when I was taking this photo was that, number one, I placed her back to the sun. I wanted to be able to get nice even light on her face, so I turned her back to the sun, and I actually utilized a natural reflector for this image because, again, we were at like a, I don't know, it's like a farm, and there was no shade anywhere, nowhere. So they had this nice like pebbly little walkway for this little market that they had. So we used these pebbles as a natural reflector to reflect light back into her face and to fill in any shadows that she would have had otherwise. For a lot of you that have photographed, you know, in the past, and you've had to photograph in full sun, you know that sometimes when you put your subjects back to the sun and you're photographing them, either they are totally dark or the background is so blown out that it's like a white halo around them. That does not look pretty in photos. So one of the ways to not have to deal with that is to make sure that you have some type of natural reflector around. And these awesome like pebble pieces or whatever this was on the ground were perfect. It was a neutral color and the light was shining on these, so it was able to reflect back into her face. It was perfect. Some other natural reflectors that I like to find are concrete. Concrete is like my best friend when it is a super sunny day. I had a wedding in DC a couple of years ago. We were at the Capitol. It was the middle of the day in like July, and it was so hot. I don't know what it is about these hot days. But we were able to photograph in the middle of the day, full on sun, y'all, having the entire bridal parties back to the Capitol where the sun was because there's concrete and it was reflecting light back into their faces. So it was nice, evenly lit, beautiful. You could still see the Capitol in the background, even in the middle of the day. So I don't want you to be scared and to feel like anytime that you're photographing, if it's a bright sunny day, that it has to be in shade. It doesn't. You can photograph in full sun as long as you know what tools you actually have available to you in your environment. Now, having said that, when you're utilizing natural reflectors, I don't necessarily recommend that you throw somebody in the middle of a field full of grass and try to shoot at high noon. Because a lot of times what you're going to find is that the sun's going to reflect off of that grass. And what color is grass? It's green. And it's going to reflect back up onto your subjects, and you're going to end up with green faces and green skin. And that is very hard to get rid of in post-processing. So my recommendation is to try to find natural reflectors. So like I said, here we had neutral colored pebbles. It could be concrete. It could be sand. It could be dirt, y'all. And I mean that. And I'm going to show you that we did that. We actually utilized dirt as a reflector for some of these photos. So you can see here in this image, again, super sunny, middle of the day. You can tell by the sun that's right here on her hair, it was super, super sunny. So what I did again, I turned her back to the sun. Slightly off to the left was the sun. Not like totally back to the sun, but very, very close. If you're totally back to the sun, then you can end up with a lot of sun flare in your lens, and that's a whole other lesson for another day. But what was great about where we were in the sunflower field was that we have this dirt, which is neutral colored, and it was reflecting back in her face, her dark face. She didn't have crazy shadows. It was just perfect. So don't be afraid to like shoot in the dirt. Don't be afraid, because it can be really, really pretty as well. Another thing that you can do if you are photographing and you are not able to find those natural reflectors for whatever reason, I suggest, honestly, photographing in full sun. So I'm going to show you a few examples from the same shoot. We really didn't have an option. We either photographed in full sun or we didn't photograph in full sun. So we photographed a multitude of different ways, and some of my favorite images were the ones where the sun was actually right on her. So like she was facing the sun instead of her back to the sun. This works particularly well if you're having to deal with a grassy situation, so you're not getting a lot of that reflection. But here, she was just walking through these beds of flowers. Again, she's got the sun slightly off to the right, slightly off to camera right here. You can see where the sun's coming in, but almost completely facing her. And we got nice, even, beautiful lighting. And one of the reasons we were able to get this is because when I was photographing, I was exposing for the highlights. So what that means is that when I was setting my camera settings, I was making sure that the brightest parts of her skin were not super crazy blown out as I was photographing. So that definitely meant that there were parts of the image that were a little bit darker than how I would normally shoot. But then when I took those into Lightroom to edit later, I was able to bring up the exposure because I hadn't lost a ton of detail because of the brightness that I would have had otherwise. So when you're shooting in full sun like this, whatever it is going to be your main focal point. Typically I'm exposing for skin. I'm going to make sure that all these highlights here, these bright parts of the skin, are not crazy overexposed, because then I'm losing tons of detail. And when I go in to Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever it is that you guys use to edit, you don't want to lose that detail. So make sure that you're exposing for those parts. Here are a couple other examples of full sun. Believe it or not, this is actually an image full sun. So you can actually tell in this one, but still a good example. She was wearing a hat, so she actually had some shade on her face. You can see where the skin here on her hand and her leg is a little bit brighter than the rest, but our focus is on her face, but it's still really beautiful. So she was facing the sun. I had her turn off to the side because I didn't want her looking straight at the sun. And I exposed for the highlights to make sure that these weren't so blown out that there was like no detail at all. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, where you photograph something and it's too bright to the point where it's like absolutely white and you have no, like there's nothing there. There's no detail. And then when you take it into like Lightroom or Photoshop and you try to bring down the exposure, you have nothing there. Like it's like a white space. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about shooting for the highlights, exposing for the highlights. Anyway, so when I was taking this into Photoshop or into Lightroom to edit, I was able to increase the exposure. So we didn't have such a big shadow on her face, and we had nice even light. It was perfect. And then I'm going to show you one more. All of this, guys, was like full sun. Here's another one. So here we were, again, just a different part of the pumpkin patch, and totally full sun, right on her. But what I really loved about this is typically when you put your subjects back to the sun, the background is like white. So you don't really get any detail because it's the sky. And, it's typically going to be pretty blown out. But what was really nice about this, doing it a little bit differently, turning her around, is we actually were able to get some clouds and sky detail that you typically don't get when you have your subjects back to the sun. Because it was really, really great. And you can see it's nice, even light. I'll show you another one. Same place, just playing around a little bit. And here you go. Nice, even light. No like crazy shadows. There's a little bit of shadows, but for the most part, it's nice and even. And I'll tell you a little trick that I do for any time that I have someone that I'm photographing or even a group of people, and they're having to not necessarily look at the sun, but it's a little bit brighter. I will tell them to close their eyes. You guys probably know. I didn't make up this trick. You might know this. I tell them to close their eyes, and when I count to 3, once I get to 3, they open, and then I take the photo. That way we don't get like crazy squinties. So it's a really great way to not have that. So those are my tips for photographing in full sun. I'm going to say, number 1, don't be afraid of it. Just go with it. Number 2, try to find some natural reflectors around you, whether it be dirt, sand, pebbles, concrete. You're going to find a lot of concrete, especially if you're here in the Virginia, D.C. area. Also see if you can find other reflectors around you. It could be a white wall. It could be benches. It could be a white truck. It could be anything that's going to reflect light is going to work as your reflector. And also make sure that when you're photographing, you are exposing for your highlights. So when you bring it into Lightroom or Photoshop for post-processing, then you'll be able to have a proper exposure for those finished images after you're done editing. So hopefully that was really helpful for you guys. These are my tips. I don't think anybody has any questions, but you can always come back and refer to this video later on. And as I mentioned before in past videos, we do a different lesson every Thursday, so make sure that you tune in. Typically it's at 4 o'clock on Thursdays. I was flying in from Charleston today, so we had to switch that time. And then also open Q&A on Mondays on Facebook Live at noon, so you can start your week. And let me know any questions that you have regarding business, photography, weddings. It could be anything. You can post your question in the group or on the page, on the Facebook page, or send me a private message and I'll make sure that I answer your questions there. So hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week and a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday. Bye.